how you all doing? Welcome back to the session on critical reasoning by Anupam Mishra part 2. And before we get started, I'm just gonna confirm. Let me just confirm. Hello Sakat, how are you? कैसे हैं आप? So before we get started, I'm just gonna confirm if the audio, visual, and everything is clear. Am I visible to everyone? क्या मैं दिखाई दे रहा हूँ, सुनाई दे रहा हूँ सभी को? Okay. Hello. Hi Ram. Hi Ram Shrikant. Uh, okay. I'm still waiting. Okay. Yeah.
Hello. Hi Ram. Hi Ram.
Okay. Perfect. So the audio visual is clear. That's for sure. So let's get started, guys. Yesterday, can you guys just remind me where we left off yesterday? Yesterday we were discussing some critical reasoning errors. हम लोग discuss कर रहे थे, right? नहीं, some types of logical fallacies that we had been discussing yesterday. So we were done with ad populum and ad vericandium. ये दोनों हमारे हो चुके थे. We were done with the ad hominem. We were done with fallacies of causation, right? We were also done with fallacies of causation. Red herring भी हो गया था हमारा. Circular reasoning, and circular reasoning also we were done with it, right? So I think we were done with these five. These five we were done with already yesterday, and today probably I think is that right, Sakat? You were there, right, yesterday? So I think today we'll pick up exactly where we had left off yesterday. We'll start with your hasty generalizations and these other types of fallacies, the last two. Okay, so let's begin, and I'm just gonna once we are done with this part, we'll move on to the elements of an argument. All right, so so let's start. ये सब हमारा हो गया था. We had discussed populum, vericandium, ये सब, all of this was done. I'm just gonna move on directly to fallacies of hasty generalizations. Fallacies of hasty generalizations. There are two types of there are two categories when it comes to hasty generalizations. I think I'm sure a lot of you, like, this is one of those critical reasoning errors that is committed by almost everyone day in and day out. Like I think this would be the most prevalent type of critical reasoning error that people commit, and especially because the error of stereotyping. आपने stereotyping सुना होगा, right? You guys must have heard of stereotyping. Okay, these type of people from this area are generally like this. People from these areas are generally like this, etc. So your stereotyping is basically one example of this kind of hasty generalization kind of error. Okay, so now so we'll be talking about two categories here. The first category is when you are generalizing from the group towards the individual. Okay, when you have certain notions about a certain group. Let's say this is the group, and about this particular group you have certain notions ki, okay, this particular group has characteristic A, characteristic B, and characteristic C, etc., so on and so forth. And then deriving basis this information that you think that this group generally has this particular these characteristics. If you come to know about one individual who you come to know that it is probably particularly belongs to that group, you'll probably overlap you'll overlap these characteristics with that individual as well. So basically, just because these people in this particular group generally have these characteristics, this individual, because he comes from that group, definitely must have the same characteristics as well, right? So that's called your fallacy of division, or fallacy of the first type of fallacy of hasty generalizations, right? A good example here would be, let's say I've given you a couple of examples here, but I want to give something more relatable here. Let's say let's say males are generally good at driving automobiles. Males, or generally guys, are good at driving automobiles or handling machines, etc., or driving automobiles, right? And so this is basically I've made an observation about a group here, right? I've made an observation about a group here. Now if basis this, if I go on to generalize that each and every male will definitely be good at driving automobiles, that would be a hasty generalization, right? Just because the majority of them seem to be, just because the group generally, more often than not, the members of the group seem to have a good ability, are generally found apt at driving automobiles, doesn't mean that each and every member that belongs to a group or class will be able to do it. Okay, so that's one example. So the first category grows from the group to the individual. Okay, the second category, for the second category, is it's just the other way around. Okay, you go from the individual to the group. You have certain notions about the individual, let's say A, B, C, etc., and basis that you derive inferences about the group. Okay, for example, a very good example here would be, let's suppose you came across, you went to a foreign country for the first time. Okay, let's say you went to China. Let's say you went to China for the first time, and the first person you met there, was kind of impolite. I'm just making this up. I'm not trying to make any political statement here. You need to understand that. It's just an example here, just for the sake of this, I'm having you understand this theory. So let's suppose the first person you met there, a Chinese person, was not very polite, was kind of impolite to you. And if basis on that data point, or basis on that singular data point, you try to come to a conclusion that all Chinese people are generally impolite, are impolite, that would be a hasty generalization. And in this case, what you're doing is, you're not going from drawing an inference about an individual basis the inference about a group. You're going the other way around. You're actually drawing an inference about a group basis your inference about a particular individual. And that's even worse, because in this case you don't even have enough data. In the first case, at least you had a lot of data points, right? The second case, you have just one single data point from which you're trying to derive inferences about the characteristics of the whole group. Okay, so that's quite erroneous, right? So that's your second type of fallacy of hasty generalization, right? So that's all right. So that's about the fallacies number 6, fallacies of type of 6. The last type of fallacies, guys, that we'll be talking about in the seventh category of fallacies. In the seventh category of fallacies, I've actually placed 4 of them together. I've placed 4 fallacies together in the seventh category. Okay, this is your first one, this is your second one, third one, and the fourth one. Okay, the reason is because we cannot have the stress. We have to discuss the fallacies, these logical fallacies. It's useful to discuss them to get you oriented towards critical reasoning, but at the same time we cannot just be spending time only on fallacies. We need to start solving some questions, etc. That's one. Second, the reason is the fallacies that I've discussed with you thus far are usually have more prevalence in the questions of critical reasoning when you look at papers of XAT or CAT or other management examinations that feature critical reasoning questions. On the other hand, while the fallacies that you have here on your screen, they are also important, but the weightage associated with these would probably be slightly less. And for the same reason, I've just put them up. I'm going to cover all of them in the same slide. Okay, I'm going to cover all of them in the same category. Although they are pretty different in nature. They are actually quite different in nature. They're not the same thing at all. Okay, so the first fallacy, the first category in this the first type of fallacy in this category that we are going to be discussing is the one of burden of proof. Okay, so what is burden of proof? let's suppose all of you who are watching this session, I make a claim to I make a claim to you. I make a claim that guys, the session that I'm taking here right now, जो मैं आपका सेशन ले रहा हूँ अभी on this logical fallacies, etc., critical reasoning, I'm actually taking this session not from the planet. I'm taking this session from a different galaxy. I'm not taking this session from this planet. Okay, I'm taking this session from a different galaxy which has a similar planet, which also has all the same characteristics as the planet Earth, etc., 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 and I go on and make up a story basically, and then claim that's the reality. Okay, and then obviously you'll ask me, you'll think that I've gone bonkers maybe, and but you'll probably ask me, okay, sir, we don't think that what you're saying is correct. Maybe you have been teaching critical reasoning for too long and you've gone bonkers here. Maybe that's a better explanation of what you're saying. I'll say no, it's not true. I'm not gone bonkers. I actually have everything in my cognitive abilities right where they should be, and I'm actually taking this session from a galaxy far away. You tell me, you ask me to prove it. okay, give us a proof that you're taking this galaxy from a galaxy far you're taking this session from a galaxy far away. I just turn the argument on you, and I go on and ask you, okay, I am not going to give you any proof. Rather, if you think that I'm not taking this lecture from a galaxy far away, you prove it to me that I'm actually taking this lecture just from this planet. I'm not taking it from any place else, from a different galaxy. You prove it to me that I'm not taking this lecture from a different galaxy. Okay, so you see what I did there. And then in case you're not able to prove that, I'm anyways gonna assume that well, in that case we can have it established that I'm actually taking this lecture from a galaxy far away. Okay, so see, what I've done here is I've shifted the burden of proof. Do you guys think the argument that I just made made some sense? Do you think the argument where I asked you to present the proof that I'm not taking this lecture from a different galaxy made sense? Ram, Saikat, anyone else? You probably think that I'm looking to the left side because that's where I'm watching your comments. So okay, so don't be worried about that. So see, I'll tell you what. It did not make sense at all. And the reason is this. The reason is I basically shifted the burden of proof from myself to yourself. Okay, and that's exactly where the logical fallacy lies. The logical fallacy here is, see, the rule goes something like this. The burden of proof is always on the party that is making the claim, okay. In this scenario where I claim that I'm taking this lecture from a galaxy far away, it is I am the party. It is I who's making the claim, right? It is not you, it is not the audience, it is I who's making the claim, and hence the burden of proof should lie with me. I am required to present you with some proof which proves beyond reasonable doubt that I'm actually taking this lecture from a galaxy far away. Okay, so that's called your burden of proof fallacy. And second, let's now move on to the next one. Let's go to the next fallacy, which is called the fallacy of slippery slope. And there's a very good example that I have here to share with you guys, which will drive home the point very easily. What is the slippery slope fallacy? So guys, you must have you've all been you guys are students, right? And even those of you who are probably working right now must have been students at some point of time in your lives, and you must have been in the scenario where you ask your parents that I want to go for a certain movie with my friends, I want to go for a certain sleepover with my friends, I want to go to a certain party with my friends, etc. Something, etc. You might be asking to do that, but okay, but your parents must have come up with a very ridiculous argument. At some point or the other in your life, in your student life, you must have heard this argument, and the argument went something like कि ओके, अगर आपके दोस्त ये कर रहे हैं, अगर दोस्त आपके कुएं में कूद जाएंगे तो आप भी कुएं में कूद जाओगे. Okay, if your friends jump into a well, will you also jump into a well, right? Have you been in that situation where you may have encountered this argument from your parents? I think all of us have been at some point or other. Maybe not from parents, maybe from someone else, maybe some different elders. But yes, right. So what they're basically juxtaposing. They're basically comparing and juxtaposing going for a movie with jumping into a well, right? Going for a movie with jumping into a well. Going for a movie, if I go for a movie with a friend doesn't necessarily mean if my friend is going for a movie and I also want to go for a movie, that doesn't necessarily mean that when he wants to go and jump into a well, I also will want to go and jump into a well, right? Correct. So that's called your slippery slope argument. So the essence of your parents' argument is that if we allow you one step ahead, you will actually find you tumbling down a slippery slope. Where at the top of the slope you have just going for a movie, and at the bottom of the slope you have, well, jumping into a well along with your friend. So that's your slippery slope argument. That's how it makes sense. It doesn't make sense actually. So that's the second type of fallacy in this category. The third type of fallacy is called the anecdotal evidence fallacy. Guys, anecdotal evidence is something that people are able to relate to very easily because it comes in some form of a story. You know what an anecdote is, right? An anecdote is basically a story. So people are able to relate to it very well, but it is usually not logically. It doesn't have the logical integrity to support an argument. Why? Because at the end of it, an anecdotal evidence is nothing but a single data point, a singular data point. The singular data point is not enough to support any sort of claim, any sort of hypothesis. Okay, so for example, just look at this. Roger thought that smoking is harmless. He claimed his friend's father used to smoke 20 cigarettes a day and never got sick in his life. All right. So what is Roger quoting here to support his argument that smoking is harmless? He's quoting an incident where his friend's father used to smoke 20 cigarettes a day and never got sick in his life. Well, there might have been multiple other reasons because of which he did not get sick. Maybe he had a different genetic mutation which rendered him I don't know, probably innocuous, which rendered the cigarette smoke innocuous for him, right? Harmless for him. So there might be multiple reasons why it might not happen in that one particular case, but you cannot just quote that one particular instance कि हाँ एक बार ऐसा हुआ था तो आगे भी ऐसा ही होगा. To go on and claim that yes, what do you say? It happened once this way, so it's gonna happen the same way again and again. That number one, that singular data is not statistically significant, right, to support any kind of hypothesis or claim. Okay, so that's called your anecdotal evidence fallacy of anecdotal evidence. Okay, let's move on to the next one, last one, prejudicial language, the fallacy of prejudicial language. Okay, and this is a very clear, this is a fallacy that people use very cleverly. What they do is, whenever they are asking a question or whenever they are making a point, they'll very slyly start use a very use some sort of positive or negative adjective in their point. For example, just look at this argument that I've written here. Just wait a second. Let me just move my video. Just 1 second, guys. I'll just move the so that you can view this. Yeah, this is better, I think. Right? This must be better. Okay. So you can see the argument here, right? Okay. So just look at this this part. All right. So where were we? So prejudicial language. Just look at this particular sentence. Example: any reasonable person would agree that the way excuse this typo, that the way our country's economic policy is getting implemented is seriously flawed. What is the author saying? That any reasonable person would agree that the way our country's economic policy is being implemented is seriously flawed. So what if I tell the author that, okay, bro, I don't agree with that. You think that any person would agree with that? I don't agree with that. I think the country's economic policy is being implemented in the perfect manner it could be implemented. The author might just respond to me with pointing out the word reasonable. He might just say, bro, I'm talking about reasonable people. Right? So he said that what I said was any reasonable person would agree that the economic policy is not being implemented without any flaws. If you do not agree, you probably you're not a reasonable person, right? So he's almost made a very well protected argument. He's made a very protected argument here, and right, and so anyone who agrees with him, well he agrees with him, and anyone who doesn't agree with him, he'll just regard that person as unreasonable, right? This is called the use of prejudicial language to make an argument. The prejudicial part is this reasonable, the word reasonable is the prejudicial part. Okay, where so he has just very slightly used an adjective to allow him to come up with different to allow him to retort to people who do not agree with his claim. Correct? So that's called your prejudicial language kind of fallacy. All right. So guys, with that, I hope this is clear to everyone. Saket and Ram and everyone else. सभी को clear है ये? Is this clear to everyone? With this, we are done with all the fallacies that we were to discuss. And what I'm gonna do now is all set, right, guys? All set? Take it. Let's move on now. Let's move on now to the next part. But before we do that, I'll actually want to wait a second. I'll just go to the this and just confirm that we have. So we did we are done with ad hominem, right? We're done with ad hominem. We are done with just a second. Ad hominem, ad vericandium, ad populum, fallacies of causation, red herring, circular reasoning, history generalizations, burden of proof, anecdotal evidence, slippery slope, and prejudicial language. So we are done with this part. Now what we are going to do is we are going to move on to this part, and we will try to quickly cover this part, and so that whenever we join again, and probably not probably definitely we have a session tomorrow at from 3 to 3:30. We'll directly move on to questions. Hopefully if we get some time, we'll try to do some questions now as well. But definitely for tomorrow we'll be starting directly with questions. Okay, so now the part that we're going to be moving on to is going to be about the elements of an argument, the fundamental elements of an argument. Okay, so let's start. There you go. Okay, so is the slide visible to everyone? The fundamental elements of an argument. So guys, I'm going to share an analogy with you. And which through which I'll drive home the point that how exactly an argument is supposed to be construed. An argument or a proposition is supposed to be construed. The one, if someone is making an argument, how do you construe that argument? And if you're yourself making an argument, how do you make an argument? How do you go on and make a proposition for a certain claim or hypothesis that you have? Okay, so so that's your elements. Okay, now so what I want you to do here, guys, is the analogy, I'm sure it must be very clear to you as it is on your screen, but I'm still gonna go on and explain this a bit further, because there are many points which are not necessarily which don't intuitively come out of whatever information is given on your screen. And the points are these. So what I want you to do is think of your argument or your proposition, your argument or the proposition that you're making as a wall. Try to think of your argument or the proposition that you're making as a wall. It's like imagine it to be a wall. Okay, let's say this is your argument. This is the argument you're trying to make. Okay, you can. So and like the way an argument. Now, what is a wall made up of? A wall is made up of basically two items, right? Essentially, see, although I'm sure there must be so many items involved, but essentially on a very macro level, a wall is made up of only two items. The first is the bricks, right? And the second is the mortar, right? Okay, the first is the bricks, the second is the mortar. Now similarly, in the analogous paradigm of an argument, where your argument is serving as the wall, your bricks, the function that the bricks do for a wall, the same function is done by evidence or data for your argument. And the function that is performed by the mortar for your wall, the same function is performed by the logic that you use in your argument for your argument. Okay, so see, what exactly does a brick, how exactly does a brick help a wall? A brick is basically a solid piece of stone. I can't call it stone. It's just a solid piece which which makes up the main frame of the wall, so see, the brick makes the main frame of the wall, while the mortar basically joins multiple bricks together. And hence the wall is created. Similarly, your evidence are basically items that you cannot change. With it, they're just there. You cannot really do much about the evidence. The facts always remain as they are. They do not change. And your logic basically stitches your facts together to make up an argument. Right? Isn't that what happens? It's the same with bricks and walls. Your mortar basically comes together and sticks all the bricks together to make up a wall. In the same way in which your the logic that you're using stitches multiple pieces of evidence together to make up an argument, right? Just imagine if there were a wall which was made only out of bricks. In that scenario, well, there would be no mortar, right? So the bricks won't be able to stay one over the other. Just a small push will drop the whole wall. The same thing with an argument. If in an argument I do not use any logic, I just give you facts, it doesn't seem like I'm making a point. It doesn't seem like I'm making a point. You're just giving fact. Doesn't mean you're expressing an opinion or taking a stand, right? So that's similarly. So that's what an argument with evidence and without logic is like. Similarly, let's suppose you have a wall which doesn't have bricks, which has only mortar. Well, in that case, you might be able to build something, but it won't be able to hold because the mortar has nothing that it can hold on to, has nothing that it can stitch together, that it can stick together, not stitch together, stick together. It has nothing to hold on to, right? Similarly, in case you have an argument which is only based on logic, that has no basis in evidence or data, in that scenario again, you have an argument that is almost abstract in nature. It's almost abstract in nature. It is not based on anything that is there in reality, right? That's necessarily there in reality, and hence that's why you call it. That's why this is called your mod, right? Now, see, that's how I want you guys to think about your argument. That's another way in which this logic or this analogy holds together is, and the other way is that in case of evidence and facts you cannot change anything, like similarly the way you cannot change anything in case of bricks. In case of logic is malleable. Logic is malleable the way mortar is malleable, right? And the another way in which this analogy fits well is that whenever you are targeting an argument, जब भी आप कोई argument को target कर रहे हैं, you're targeting an argument, right? What do you do? What do you do when you target an argument? Like when you have you guys ever put a nail in a wall? आपने कभी भी कील मारी है दीवार पे? Have you guys ever put a nail in a wall? You must have, right? And you must have noticed that it is always the areas where you have the mortar that it is easier to put the nail in the wall. Correct? It is always the areas where you have mortar. It's not the areas where you have the bricks where it is easy to put the wall. It actually becomes difficult if you try to put a nail in the wall at the point where you have the bricks. It's actually, but it is easier to put the nail in the wall where you have the mortar. Similarly, in case of an argument, in real world, of course, people cite wrong evidence, so that's a different scenario. But in the context of questions, there's not much that you can do about the evidence. The evidence and the facts have been given as it is, have been provided as it is. They have been taken. They have to be taken the way they are. The only thing that you can do to strengthen or weaken an argument is to do something with the logic. If you want to put a hole in the wall, you target the mortar. You do not target the brick. Similarly, if you want to put a hole in the argument, you do not target the facts, because the facts are not malleable. They cannot be changed, at least in the context of your questions. In real life, the facts are changed all the time. That's a different story altogether. But in case of your context, in the context of your questions, at least, you can actually target the logic, right? So that's exactly what you do when you are solving a critical reasoning questions. When you're solving a critical reasoning questions, your objective should always be, see, either you'll have to infer something, or you'll have to strengthen an argument, or you'll have to weaken an argument. Your focus will always be the logic that is being used to derive, that is being used to put forth the proposition or the argument in the main stem of the question. Okay, and accordingly you address the argument. You either strengthen it or weaken it depending on what the question asks you to do. Okay, so that's about it, guys. Finally, with this session, with the second session, we have been able to cover, what do you say, the 7 major types of fallacies. We have covered this. We have also covered the elements of an argument. Tomorrow we'll just start with not the types. We'll actually start with your critical reasoning questions for XAT. Okay, tomorrow at the same time we'll meet again at the same time, and from 3 to 3:30 we'll have another session, and we'll start with your actual comments. Otherwise, I'll call it a day, and we'll sign off. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. I guess there are no other doubts, so thanks a lot. Have a great time ahead, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you so much. So, all right.